Before we dive into a story about a simple act of kindness that leads to unexpected encounters and hidden truths, hit that subscribe button and like this video. And tell me in the comments, have you ever paid for a stranger's fare or meal? The air on the bus. The alarm shrieked at 4:30 a.m. A harsh, familiar sound that tore Isabella from a too-short sleep. She sighed, feeling the weight of another grueling day settling onto her shoulders before it had even begun. Her worn sneakers shuffled across the cold floor as she started her morning routine, the quiet choreography of preparing for a double life. 8 hours on her feet serving coffee, followed by 6 hours hunched over textbooks at the university. The air conditioning on the bus barely worked, a familiar discomfort on the routes that connected the city center to the more humble neighborhoods. She sank into a seat near the back, resting her head against the condensation-misted window, letting the rumbling engine vibrate through her. Outside, it was still dark, the city lights a distant blur. She was probably preparing dinner with what little was left in the fridge, counting down the days until her next paycheck. Isabella closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief, precious moment of rest as the bus roared to life, pulling away from the stop. Suddenly, a commotion near the entrance of the bus pulled her attention. A tall young man, dressed in clothes that looked far too expensive for this aging public transport, was in a heated discussion with the driver. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't let you on without paying," the driver grumbled, his patience clearly wearing thin. The young man was rummaging through his pockets with a mixture of frustration and surprise, his movements revealing an unfamiliarity with the situation. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture broadcasting an air of privilege that clashed jarringly with the setting. He glanced at his phone, a recent model, frowning when he realized the screen was dark, dead battery. "There must be a misunderstanding," he began, his voice smooth, accustomed to being heard. I seem to have forgotten my wallet, and my phone is dead." Isabella watched the scene unfold. In the young man's gestures, his flushed cheeks, she recognized the raw, public embarrassment she herself had felt countless times when faced with unexpected financial shortfalls. Without thinking twice, driven by a simple empathy born of shared experience, she stood up and walked towards the front, reaching into her pocket for the few coins she kept for bus fare. "I'll pay his fare," she said firmly, extending the money towards the driver. The young man turned, surprised, his warm brown eyes meeting hers for an instant. There was something in his gaze, a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment, perhaps even a flicker of vulnerability, that made her feel strangely, unexpectedly awkward. "Thank you," he murmured softly, his voice a little shaken, as he moved past her to take a seat a few rows ahead. What Isabella didn't know was that she had just helped Mateo Vargas, the heir to one of the country's most important hotel chains, Vargas Hotels, a man who had never before had to worry about the price of a bus ticket, a man whose life existed in a different stratosphere, now connected to hers by a few simple coins and a moment of unexpected kindness. During the rest of the journey, Mateo couldn't help but glance back occasionally at the girl in the worn blue sweater who, without hesitation, had paid his way. In his world of board meetings, luxury cars, and exclusive events, such a simple, selfless gesture was practically non-existent. The bus rumbled on through the city streets, carrying two people from vastly different worlds, linked by an act of pure kindness that neither of them could have imagined would change the course of their lives forever. Part 2. The Unexpected Visitor. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small cafe, a comforting scent that was as familiar to Isabella as her own reflection. She was wiping down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that morning, lost in her thoughts about next week's university exam. Her coworkers were joking about the manager's obsession with cleanliness, but she barely paid attention, her mind occupied with juggling schedules and study notes. The jingle of the bell above the door pulled her from her reverie. She looked up, and her heart gave a sudden, unexpected leap. It was him, the guy from the bus. He was dressed more casually than the day before, but his posture, his effortless confidence, still hinted at a world beyond this working-class neighborhood. He scanned the cafe, his gaze settling on her, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Matteo walked towards the counter with a studied casualness, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning," he greeted with a slightly shy smile that didn't quite match his sophisticated demeanor. "Could you recommend something special?" Isabella watched him, a mixture of curiosity and caution swirling within her. He seemed out of place here, like a character from a different story had wandered onto her set. "Our house coffee is pretty good," she replied, keeping her tone even, professional. "And the chocolate cookies are baked right here every morning." "Sounds perfect," he said, his gaze lingering for a moment. After a brief pause, he added, his voice a little softer, "By the way, thank you for yesterday, on the bus. That was very kind of you." "It was nothing," she responded, turning to prepare his coffee, the heat rising slightly in her cheeks. "Happens to everyone sometimes." As she worked, she could feel his eyes on her, following her movements. There was something about him that didn't quite fit. The way he spoke, the almost too careful way he held the ceramic mug, as if he were accustomed to fine porcelain instead of sturdy cafe ware. "Do you come around here often?" he asked, attempting to keep the conversation going. "I work here," she replied with a small smile, gesturing to the apron. "Have for about 2 years. Surprisingly, conversation flowed with unexpected ease after that. Matteo stayed longer than necessary, asking questions about the neighborhood, about the cafe, about Isabella's university studies. He seemed genuinely interested, his curiosity refreshing compared to the superficial interactions she was used to. Little by little, Isabella found herself lowering her guard, finding something compelling in his presence, in the way he seemed to truly listen. From that day on, it became a routine. Matteo appeared every morning, always ordering something different from the menu, always finding an excuse to linger for a while longer. Isabella began to anticipate his visits, to look forward to their conversations that ranged from books and movies to future dreams and aspirations. She noticed small things about him, the way he would subtly frown when he was deep in thought, the way his eyes would light up when he spoke of his dreams of traveling the world, or how he always left a generous tip, tucked discreetly under his cup, without making a show of it. "You never get tired of coming here?" she asked him one day, while wiping down nearby tables. "Are you kidding? This place has become my refuge," Matteo responded, watching her hand as she expertly drew a perfect heart in the foam of his cappuccino. "Besides," he added, his voice low, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "nobody else makes coffee like you do." Isabella rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress a smile. "Flatterer. I bet you say that in every cafe you visit." "Only in this one," he replied, with a sincerity that caught her off guard. For Matteo, these moments in the cafe had become the only time he felt he could truly be himself. There were no expectations to meet, no image to maintain, no legacy to uphold. He was simply a guy, talking to a girl who treated him like anyone else, judging him not by his name or his family's fortune, but by the quality of his coffee and the content of his character. What started as a casual encounter on a bus was slowly, subtly, blossoming into something more, something neither of them quite dared to name yet. Part 3. A routine forms and mysteries emerge. Days spun into weeks, and Matteo's visits to the cafe became as natural and expected as the morning sun filtering through the windows. Isabella had begun to notice smaller details about him, the kind you only pick up with familiarity. How his brow would furrow in concentration when he read, the faint scent of expensive cologne that lingered after he passed, the way his eyes would light up when he spoke of distant cities and cultures he longed to explore. He was woven into the fabric of her routine now, a bright thread in the everyday rhythm of her life. "You never get tired of coming here?" she asked him one afternoon, preparing his usual late-day coffee. His third of the day, a testament to how long he lingered. "Are you kidding? This place has become my refuge," Matteo responded, leaning back in his chair, watching her expert hands as she drew a perfect heart in the foam of his cappuccino. "Besides," he added, his voice low, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "nobody else makes coffee like you do." Isabella rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress a smile. "Flatterer. I bet you say that in every cafe you visit." Only in this one, he replied, with a sincerity that caught her off guard. For Matteo, these moments in the cafe had become the only time he felt he could truly be himself. There were no expectations to meet, no image to maintain, no legacy to uphold. He was simply a guy, talking to a girl who treated him like anyone else, judging him not by his name or his family's fortune, but by the quality of his coffee and the content of his character. What started as a casual encounter on a bus was slowly, subtly, blossoming into something more, something neither of them quite dared to name yet. The connection deepened, built on shared laughter, quiet confidences, and the comfortable silence that sometimes fell between them. Yet, amidst the growing closeness, doubts began to appear like small cracks in a mirror. At first, they were insignificant details: the brand of his phone, always the latest model, the shoes that looked expensive and never seemed to wear out despite him supposedly taking the bus, the way he spoke of certain high-end restaurants or clubs as if he frequented them regularly, then quickly changed the subject. One particularly busy morning, as Matteo gestured while telling a story, the glint of his watch caught the light. A Rolex. Isabella wasn't an expert on luxury watches, but she'd seen enough convincing imitations sold on the streets to recognize the unmistakable authenticity of this one. She frowned slightly, a name she'd heard before, linked to wealth and prominence, flickering at the edge of her memory. Altamira? Nice watch, she commented casually during a brief lull, watching his reaction closely. Altamira is your last name, isn't it? Matteo visibly tensed for a brief instant before recovering his composure, a carefully constructed mask slipping back into place. Yes, but it's not what you think. He instinctively pulled his sleeve down slightly, covering the watch. This was a gift. From an uncle. Must be a very generous uncle, she replied, keeping her tone neutral, though her mind raced. The inconsistencies began to accumulate. Matteo never answered calls when he was in the cafe. He always stepped outside to talk in hushed tones. When she mentioned his work, his descriptions were vague, almost rehearsed, something about family business, management, lots of meetings. And there was something about his way of talking about money, or rather around money, that didn't quite fit with someone she understood was starting from zero. One afternoon, while cleaning the tables near the window, Isabella saw him climb into a car with a driver that had been waiting discreetly around the corner. It was a luxury sedan, the kind that didn't belong in this neighborhood. He didn't see her, and the next morning, he appeared as usual, stepping off the bus. The doubt solidified into a cold, uncomfortable certainty. Something wasn't right. Matteo, she said during one of her breaks, pulling him aside, her voice quiet but firm, deciding to confront the situation directly. Why have you never invited me to your place? Not once. He tensed visibly, his usual easy smile faltering. I live in a very small place. It's nothing special. And where is this small place? She pressed gently, but persistently. Why, in 2 months, have you never even mentioned the neighborhood? The street? Anything? Isabella, Matteo fumbled with his coffee cup, searching for the right words, his eyes pleading with her to drop it. It's complicated. What's complicated? She asked, her voice losing its gentleness, a hint of hurt creeping in. Telling the truth? The silence that followed was heavy, charged with unspoken questions and hidden truths. Matteo finally lifted his gaze, his eyes filled with a silent plea, a desperate hope that she would understand without him having to say the difficult words. There are things about my life that I prefer to keep private right now. Can we just leave it at that? A sharp pang of disappointment, cold and sudden, pierced through her growing affection for him. She had opened up to him, shared her life, her struggles, her dreams, and he, in return, offered only vague answers and requests for privacy. Sure, she replied, her voice colder than usual, pulling back emotionally. Whatever you want. But as she returned to work, an uncomfortable feeling settled in her stomach. The person she thought she knew, the genuine, open young man from the bus and the cafe, was beginning to blur, revealing shadows and secrets she couldn't ignore. Who was Matteo, really? And more importantly, why did he feel the need to lie? Part 4. The first kiss and lingering doubts. The night had fallen over the city, the streetlights casting long shadows across the wet pavement outside the daily grind. Isabella was finishing cleaning the last tables, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound, while Matteo, as had become their custom, waited to walk her to the bus stop. "You don't have to wait for me every night, you know?" she said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder after locking the door. "I know," he replied with that easy smile, the one that still managed to charm her despite the lingering doubts. "I want to." They walked in comfortable silence along the almost empty streets. The night air carried the aroma of nearby bakeries preparing for the morning, mingled with the clean, earthy scent of recent rain. "You know," Matteo began, breaking the silence, his voice soft. "These moments, walking with you, they're the best part of my day." Isabella looked at him from the corner of her eye. Despite the unanswered questions, the subtle deception she sensed, there was something about his presence that made her feel safe, seen, as if the world were a little less complicated when he was beside her. "Even better than my specialty coffees?" she teased, attempting to lighten the mood, to push away the uncomfortable questions. "Even better," he replied, stopping suddenly under the warm, yellowish glow of a street lamp. He turned to face her, his expression serious, vulnerable. "Isabella, I—" He fell silent, as if the words were stuck in his throat, a visible struggle in his eyes. She could see the desire to say something important, something true, battling with a fear she couldn't begin to comprehend. "What is it, Matteo?" she asked softly, stepping closer, her heart pounding with a sudden, fierce intensity, sensing they were on the verge of something that could change everything. "There are so many things. I wish I could tell you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. The tension between them was palpable, charged with unspoken emotions, with questions she hadn't voiced and truths he hadn't revealed. Isabella felt her heart hammering against her ribs, acutely aware of how close they were, how fragile this moment was. Without thinking further, driven by a sudden impulse, by the confusing mix of trust and doubt and undeniable attraction, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips against his. It was a soft kiss, almost shy, a tentative exploration. But it was charged with meaning, with the unspoken hopes and fears they carried. Matteo responded gently, as if afraid she might vanish if he held her too tightly. When they separated, the world seemed to have subtly shifted on its axis. The streetlights glowed brighter, the air felt lighter, and for a brief, precious moment, the worries that typically burdened them both seemed to have vanished. Matteo began, his voice a little shaky, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise, hope, and the familiar shadow of his secret. But Isabella, fearing that whatever he said next might shatter the fragile perfection of the moment, put a finger to his lips. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Not tonight. For tonight. Let this be enough." The bus approached the stop, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Isabella stepped back with a final, soft smile, leaving Matteo standing alone under the street lamp, touching his lips where he could still feel the ghost of her kiss. Neither of them knew that this moment of perfect, fragile happiness was poised on the edge of a reality that threatened to destroy everything they had begun to build. Part 5. The secret weighs heavy. The days following the kiss were a strange blend of happiness and underlying tension. Matteo continued to visit Isabella at the cafe, but now their encounters were infused with a new intimacy. Lingering glances held unspoken promises, smiles were softer, and accidental touches of hands when passing coffee cups sent small, electric jolts through them. Yet, for every moment of closeness, the weight of Matteo's secret grew heavier, more suffocating. Every morning, as he dressed in clothes carefully chosen to appear casual and understated, he rehearsed different ways of telling Isabella the truth. "My family," he would begin in front of the mirror in his luxurious apartment, but the words would always die on his lips, choked by fear of losing her, fear of her reaction to the world he came from, a world built on expectations and appearances, a world that felt like a lie compared to the authenticity he found with her. At the cafe, Isabella also struggled with her own doubts. She couldn't ignore the way Matteo skillfully avoided certain questions, how he deftly changed the subject whenever their conversation edged too close to his personal life, his family, his actual work. A casual comment about his management job felt hollow when she remembered the driver and the luxury car. One afternoon, while cleaning tables nearby, she overheard a fragment of a phone conversation Matteo was having outside. "No, father. I cannot attend the board meeting today. Yes, I have other commitments. No, it is not negotiable." The board meeting? Isabella felt her heart clench. What kind of commitments took precedence over a family board meeting? What kind of job was this really? When he returned, acting as if nothing had happened, she tried to maintain her composure. "Everything okay?" she asked, attempting a casual tone. "Yes, just work matters," he replied, avoiding her gaze, the subtle shift in his demeanor a telltale sign. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with unspoken words, with the growing chasm of his secret. Isabella wanted to ask him directly, to shake his shoulders and demand the truth, to force him to be as open as she had been. But something held her back, perhaps the fear that the answer, the full truth, would shatter the fragile happiness they had found. From his side, Matteo felt that every lie, every half-truth, every deliberate omission, pushed him further away from the person he wanted to be, the person he felt he was when he was with Isabella. Every time she shared something personal, every time she spoke of her daily struggles, her dreams of finishing university, helping her mother, providing for her siblings, the guilt consumed him a little more. He admired her strength, her resilience, her grounded reality so deeply, and his own life, built on inherited privilege and veiled obligations, felt increasingly inauthentic by comparison. "Have you ever felt like you're living a lie?" Isabella asked him one night, as they walked towards the bus stop, the question coming out of nowhere, hitting him with unexpected force. Matteo stopped dead, his heart pounding, the casual setting suddenly charged with the weight of his secret. "Isabella? Why? Why do you ask that?" "I don't know," she replied, looking up at the night sky, her voice thoughtful. Sometimes I just feel like there's so much I don't know about you. Like you're not showing me everything." He extended his hand, wanting desperately to touch her face, to bridge the distance his secret had created, but stopped halfway. With what right, he thought, when every touch feels stained by deception. "Isabella, No," she interrupted, her voice soft but firm, meeting his gaze. "Don't say anything. If you're not ready to say the truth." The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the echo of broken promises and hidden truths. The bus arrived, its headlights cutting through the darkness, breaking the tense moment. Isabella got on, turning away without looking back, leaving Matteo standing alone with the crushing weight of his lies. Part 6. The confrontation and the exposure. It was a day like any other at the daily grind. Isabella was preparing orders, the familiar aroma of brewing coffee filling the air, while Matteo occupied his usual table by the window, a comforting fixture in the cozy atmosphere. The bell above the door jingled, announcing a new customer, and a man with a professional camera stepped inside. Isabella barely paid him any attention, accustomed to customers taking photos for social media. But this man was different. His eyes scanned the cafe with a deliberate intensity until they stopped on Matteo. A smile of recognition crossed the man's face, one that promised trouble. "Matteo Altamira!" the journalist exclaimed, raising his camera, the lens glinting. What a surprise to find the heir to the Altamira Hotel empire in such a quaint location. The flash of the camera illuminated Matteo's face, catching him utterly off guard, his complexion turning pale with shock and sudden exposure. Customers began to murmur, some pulling out their phones to record the scene or snap their own photos. Isabella froze behind the counter, the coffee pot trembling in her hands, the journalist's words echoing in her ears. Altamira? Heir? Hotel empire? The pieces of the puzzle, The expensive clothes, the Rolex, the driver, the vague answers, the board meetings, clicked into place with a sickening, brutal finality. Altamira? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Matteo rose abruptly, attempting to reach Isabella, to somehow shield her from the sudden storm. But the journalist stepped between them, pressing for a statement. Is it true you've abandoned your responsibilities at the family business? The journalist pressed, camera flashing again. Is this cafe part of some Altamira social project? No comment, Matteo replied curtly, his eyes fixed on Isabella, who had disappeared into the kitchen, needing to escape, needing to breathe. The cafe manager, alerted by the commotion, appeared, asking the journalist to leave, but the damage was already done. In a matter of minutes, the photo, the headline, the story, was spreading across social media like wildfire. Altamira heir found in Barrio Cafe. Existential crisis of young millionaire. Secret romance of hotel heir. Isabella locked herself in the small storage room at the back, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. Shock, confusion, but most dominantly, raw, devastating pain and a deep, burning sense of betrayal. The gossip magazines she occasionally glanced at during her breaks often featured articles about the Altamira family, their wealth, their hotels, their public lives. How had she not recognized him? The photos from charity events, luxury hotel openings. It had all been there, a public record of the life he had hidden. When she finally emerged, her face pale but resolute, Matteo was waiting by the back door. Isabella, please let me explain, he pleaded, reaching out to her. Explain what, Matteo? She interrupted, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbroken pain. That you've been mocking me all this time? That for you, this was just an experiment in how the other half lives. Matteo recoiled as if she had struck him. No, never, Isabella. It was never an experiment. I just wanted to be myself, away from all the expectations, away from the name. Isabella pressed her lips together, wanting to hold on to her anger, needing to, but something in the raw sincerity of his voice, the pain in his eyes, made her hesitate for a split second. It's not like that, he pleaded again, taking a tentative step towards her. Everything we shared, it was real. Real? She scoffed, tears finally threatening to spill, the words sounding like a cruel mockery. How can anything be real when it's built on lies, Matteo? On secrets? His phone vibrated incessantly in his pocket, likely his family demanding explanations, but he ignored it, his eyes fixed on her, the world he had built with her crumbling before his eyes. Go! Isabella cried, her hands trembling as she frantically rearranged coffee cups on a shelf in the storage room, needing a physical task to ground her in the storm. Just go. I never want to see you again. Matteo stood in the doorway, his face contorted with pain, his voice a low, desperate plea. Please, Isabella, let me explain. Not everything was a lie. Not us. Then what was the truth, Matteo? She spun back to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks now, uncontrolled. What was real? The coffee you ordered every morning? Or maybe when you pretended you didn't have money for the bus. That day, I genuinely didn't have cash on me, he blurted out, the small, irrelevant truth a desperate anchor in the sea of accusations. Of course, she interrupted with a bitter, sharp laugh. The great Matteo Altamira doesn't need to carry cash, does he? Must be hard to remember to carry money when you have drivers and unlimited credit cards. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any they had shared before. Through the small window of the storage room, they could see the continued commotion in the cafe, hear the murmur of customers, the click of phones as the news of the Altamira heir circulated. Isabella, Matteo tried again, his voice thick with emotion, stepping closer. Everything I feel for you, it's real. Yes, I hid who I was and I was wrong. But every moment we spent together. You know what the worst part is? She interrupted, tears streaming down her face as she wiped them away with the back of her hand, her voice broken. That I actually believed you. I believed you were someone struggling to get by. Someone who understood what it meant to work hard for your dreams. Someone who understood my life. And I do understand, he exclaimed, his voice rising, frustrated by her inability to see his truth. That's why I came here. That's why I wanted to be away from all of it. No, she cried. You don't understand. You can play at being poor, Matteo. You can visit our struggles like a tourist attraction. But at the end of the day, you have an empire waiting for you. Meanwhile, I have to keep serving coffee to pay my university fees and help my mother. You don't understand hardship. You just understand escaping. Matteo's phone vibrated again, insistently, the name of his father flashing on the screen. You should answer that, Isabella said coldly, turning away from him, unable to look at him anymore. Your real world is calling, Mr. Altamira. Isabella, please. His voice was a desperate whisper. No, Matteo. Her voice was final, unforgiving. Go back to your world of luxury. Go back to being Mr. Altamira. I don't need your pity or your lies. It was never pity, he whispered, taking a step back, his face contorted with pain, the unspoken confession of his love hanging in the air. I love you. If you really loved me, she responded, her back still to him, her voice trembling with suppressed sobs. You wouldn't have lied to me for so long. Painful silence. Now go, and don't come back. Matteo stood at the storage room door for a moment longer, hoping she would turn around, hoping for one last glance, one last chance. But Isabella remained motionless, her shoulders shaking slightly as she fought to control her sobs. Finally, he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the shattered fragments of a dream that never should have begun, and carrying with him the pieces of a heart he feared could never be mended. The truth has been revealed, and their hearts are broken. Can a relationship built on a hidden identity ever truly be real? What will Matteo do now? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Part 8. The Legacy versus the Man. The Altamira mansion stood imposingly against the night sky, its sprawling gardens and illuminated fountains now appearing to Matteo like a cruel mockery of everything he had tried to escape, of the simple, honest connection he had lost. He walked through the massive wrought iron gates, up the perfectly manicured drive, each step taking him further back into the gilded cage he had momentarily escaped. In the grand foyer, his father, Don Ernesto Altamira, awaited him, his authoritative figure casting a long shadow across the polished marble floor. In his hand, he held a tablet displaying the viral photo of Matteo at the daily grind. Finished with your little adventure among the poor? Don Ernesto asked, his voice dripping with condescension, his eyes cold and assessing. Father, don't start, Matteo replied, running a hand over his face, exhausted by the emotional turmoil, the confrontation with Isabella, the loss. Don't start. Don Ernesto's voice boomed through the vast foyer, echoing off the high ceilings. Do you have any idea of the damage you've done to this family's reputation? To the company? The headlines are everywhere. The reputation? Matteo challenged, the anger he felt towards his father momentarily eclipsing his own pain. Is that all you care about? The name? The image? I care about the legacy I have built, his father roared. A legacy you seem determined to destroy with a romantic whim involving a waitress. Don't you dare talk about her like that, Matteo warned, his fists clenched, stepping forward, ready to defend Isabella even when she had rejected him. Don Ernesto let out a dry, dismissive laugh. Did you truly believe you could escape who you are, Alejandro Matteo? That you could pretend to be someone you're not? I wasn't pretending. Matteo's voice trembled with rage and pain. For the first time in my life, I was being myself. Yourself? His father scoffed, his voice laced with scorn. You are an Altamira. You were born to lead this empire, not to play at being a nobody in some grubby cafe. The words hit Matteo like a physical blow, sharp and brutal, designed to cut him down, to remind him of his place, of the world that owned him. He looked around the opulent foyer, the expensive paintings, the antique furniture, the cold, empty grandeur. It was beautiful, yes, but soulless. Prison. "You know what, father?" Matteo said finally, his voice calm, quiet, but filled with a newfound resolve that surprised even himself. "You're right about one thing." He met his father's gaze, the pain in his eyes hardening into steely determination. "I can't escape who I am, but I can choose who I become." "What do you mean by that?" Don Ernesto's eyes narrowed, sensing a defiance he hadn't seen before. "I resign," Matteo declared, the words ringing out in the silent foyer, cutting through the legacy his father valued so much. "From the company, from the inheritance, from all of it." Don Ernesto paled, his face momentarily losing its commanding color. You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Matteo replied, taking a step back, the weight of his decision settling onto his shoulders, heavy but also strangely liberating. "Turn back now, Alejandro Matteo," his father roared, his voice laced with pure fury, the threat implicit. "Not only will I disinherit you, but I will also make sure that no partner, no competitor, no one in this industry will ever offer you employment again." Matteo paused at the first step of the grand staircase, breathing deeply, the air in the mansion suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. He turned back to face his father, and for the first time, he looked at him not with fear, but with a quiet dignity born of sacrifice. "I know." He accepted the threat, the potential hardship. "But I'd rather start from zero with my own dignity than remain trapped in this golden cage." He turned and began ascending the stairs, leaving his father standing alone in the foyer, stunned and enraged. He had lost Isabella, yes. The pain of her rejection, the finality in her voice, was a heavy burden. But perhaps, just perhaps, by walking away from the world that had always defined him, the world that had demanded he hide who he was, he might, eventually, find himself in the process. The climb felt long, but for the first time he felt like his own person, charting his own course. Part 9: Life After the Empire. The mansion was behind him now, a gilded memory he was determined to leave in the past. Matteo started over from scratch, embracing a reality that was a stark contrast to the life he'd known. He took on odd jobs, laboring on construction sites, working as a kitchen hand, anything that required effort and paid honestly. The soft, manicured hands he'd once taken for granted began to show calluses, small cuts, the indelible marks of honest work. He found a strange, unexpected satisfaction in it, a sense of building something with his own effort, earning respect not from his last name, but from his actions. His thoughts often drifted to Isabella. He wondered if she was still angry, if time would ever soften the edges of her hurt. He regretted how it had ended, the painful finality of her rejection, but he understood her pain. He had, after all, hidden a fundamental truth. He still kept her number in his new, basic model phone, a small, fragile link to a life he cherished, but he never dared to call. What could he say? "Hi, I lost everything. Can we start over?" He eventually found stable work at a small, welcoming hotel in Oaxaca, recommended by someone he met through his odd jobs. It was called Hotel Posada del Encuentro, the Inn of the Encounter. It was nothing like the luxurious establishments his family owned. The walls were painted in bright, cheerful colors, the terracotta floors worn smooth by time, and the interior courtyard filled with vibrant bougainvillea, creating an atmosphere of warm hospitality that Matteo had quickly come to love. Here, he wasn't Matteo Altamira, the heir. He was simply Alejandro, the hardworking guy always willing to lend a hand. He did a bit of everything, helping with maintenance, carrying luggage, assisting in the small restaurant kitchen, cleaning rooms. His hands, once accustomed to signing documents and holding champagne flutes, now showed the calluses and small scars of manual labor. But this work, physical and demanding, gave him a sense of satisfaction and authenticity that no boardroom meeting ever had. The guests appreciated his genuine smile, his helpful attitude. He was simply Alejandro, the employee who was always ready to go the extra mile. At nights, after his shift ended, he would sit on the hotel's rooftop, gazing at the stars, thinking of Isabella. He missed their conversations, her laugh, the way she saw him. He'd take out his phone and look at her number, a silent conversation playing out in his mind. One evening, Sophia, a coworker from the hotel's small cafe, joined him on the rooftop. She held 2 cups of coffee. "The coffee here is good," she remarked, handing him a cup. "It is," he replied, taking a sip. "But I knew someone who made it better." Sophia smiled with understanding, seeing the distant look in his eyes. "She must be special, for you to remember her so much." "She is," he sighed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But I made mistakes." "And you don't think you've paid enough for them yet?" Sophia asked, her tone gentle, seeing the weight he carried. Mateo looked out at the quiet city of Oaxaca, at the new life he was building piece by piece. He was starting from scratch, truly from scratch this time, without the safety net of his family's fortune. Don Jose, the hotel owner, a kind, older man, had taken him under his wing, teaching him every aspect of the hotel business from the ground up. "A good leader," Don Jose would say, "must know every job in his hotel, from cleaning bathrooms to managing reservations." The irony wasn't lost on Mateo, the heir learning the business from the bottom up, but this time, it was his choice. He felt like he was finally building something of his own, earning the respect of others through his actions, his hard work, not his apellido, his last name. Every night, before sleeping in the small room he rented near the hotel, he wrote in a worn notebook, detailing his experiences, his learnings, his dreams. He dreamed of one day having his own small, cozy hotel, built on honesty and hard work, where every guest felt like home. A place built with his own 2 hands, not with his father's money. And in every one of those dreams, Isabella was there, somehow making coffee, laughing, seeing him. Part 10. The truth reaches her. Back in the city, Isabella's world had returned to a semblance of normal, but it wasn't the same. The cafe felt different without Mateo. The seat by the window where he used to sit remained empty most of the time. Weeks turned into months, and though things settled into a routine, every corner reminded her of him, a painful echo of a connection that had ended abruptly, shrouded in mystery and perceived lies. She was working extra hours again, needing the money, though Sophia, her coworker, noticed it was more than just financial need driving her relentless work ethic. "Working extra hours again, Isabella?" Sophia asked one afternoon, watching her obsessively clean the counter for the 3rd time. "Need the money," Isabella replied curtly, though they both knew it was more than that. Newspapers and social media still occasionally speculated about the mysterious Altamira heir who had vanished from public life. Some said he was in Europe, others that he was trying to start his own company. Isabella avoided reading any news related to him, but it was hard to completely escape. In the university, she buried herself in her studies with renewed determination. Her professors noticed the change, congratulating her on her improved grades, not knowing that every textbook, every exam, was a way to keep her mind occupied, a shield against thinking about the man who had hurt her. One afternoon, while organizing her backpack to go home, Isabella found a small, crumpled paper, a hastily drawn coffee cup design with a note written in Mateo's familiar handwriting. "The best coffee in the world, served by the best barista." The date was only a month before everything fell apart, but it felt like another lifetime. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her: tenderness, anger, confusion. "Are you okay?" her mother, Elena, asked that night, noticing how Isabella was pushing her dinner around her plate without eating. "Yes, just tired," she replied, forcing a smile. In her moments of weakness, lying awake at night, Isabella would question if she had been too harsh. Didn't he deserve a chance to explain? But then she would remember the lies, the half-truths, the feeling of being mocked, and the anger would resurface, cold and protective. Then, one Friday night, Javier, an old university acquaintance of Mateo's, walked into the cafe. Isabella recognized him immediately from photos she'd seen of Mateo at social events. "Please," he said, approaching the counter, studying her with open curiosity. "You're Isabella, right?" She nodded dryly, concentrating on preparing his coffee, wary of anyone connected to that part of Mateo's life. "You know," Javier continued, accepting the coffee, "I've never seen Alejandro Mateo so happy as when he talked about you. If you came here to defend him," Isabella began, ready to shut him down. "No," he interrupted, his tone serious. "I came because I think you deserve to know the truth. The whole truth about him." Isabella left the coffee on the counter and started to walk away, her determination not to get pulled back in warring with a sudden, fierce curiosity. But his next words stopped her cold. Alejandro Mateo tried to renounce his inheritance 3 years ago. She turned, surprised, her curiosity overcoming her resistance. 3 years ago? Why? His father threatened to destroy his mother's career as a pianist if he did, Javier explained, his voice low. "Mrs. Vargas is a gifted musician, and Don Ernesto has enough influence to close every door in the music world to her. Mateo couldn't bear that." Javier sighed. He was trying to escape that world of expectations and control even back then. In university, he tried to pass himself off as a regular student, took public transport, wore normal clothes, but his father always found a way to remind him of his place. Remind him he was an Altamira Vargas. Isabella sat down slowly, processing the information, seeing the facade Mateo had to maintain, the gilded cage. "The last time I saw him," Javier continued, "a few months ago, he had signed the papers renouncing everything. His father disinherited him, of course. Cut him off completely." Isabella's breath hitched. He had actually done it? But this time Mateo didn't give in, Javier said, a note of admiration in his voice. His mother supported him, said it was time they both stopped living under Don Ernesto's shadow. "And where is he now?" Isabella asked, surprising herself with the question, the anger and hurt momentarily receding, replaced by a dawning understanding. "Starting over," Javier replied, finishing his coffee. "From below, like he always wanted." He stood up, leaving a generous bill under the cup. "Working at a small hotel in Oaxaca, learning the business from the ground up. Cleaning rooms, helping with maintenance. Real work." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "I didn't come here to convince you of anything, Isabella, but I just thought you deserved to know that the Alejandro Mateo you met here, the one who fell in love with your coffee, your laugh, your strength, that was the real one. The other one, the Altamira Vargas heir, that was the lie." Camila Isabella remained seated long after Javier left, the words echoing in her mind. For the first time since everything fell apart, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a different way. A way that didn't paint him as a simple deceiver, but as a man caught in a complex, painful struggle, a man who had made a monumental sacrifice for his own authenticity. The memory of the broken look in his eyes when she told him to leave resurfaced, now seen through the lens of Javier's explanation. Part 11. The Journey and the Search. The small hotel in Oaxaca was nothing like the luxurious Altamira Vargas establishments Mateo had grown up in. The adobe walls were painted in bright, cheerful colors, the terracotta floors worn smooth by time, and the interior courtyard bloomed with vibrant bougainvillea, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. This was Hotel Posada del Encuentro, the Inn of the Encounter. And Mateo, now simply Alejandro to everyone here, had learned to love it. Alejandro, called Don Jose, the hotel owner, a kind, older man who had taken him under his wing. "Are you done with the air conditioning in room 12? "Coming, Don Jose," he replied, tucking away the freshly washed sheets he was folding. His hands, once soft and manicured, now showed calluses and small scars, the marks of honest work that gave him more satisfaction than any boardroom victory ever had. He did a bit of everything here: maintenance, cleaning, assisting guests. The guests appreciated his genuine smile, his helpful attitude. He was simply Alejandro, the hardworking young man always ready to help. At nights, Sitting on the hotel rooftop after his shift, he would look at the stars and think of Isabella. He wondered if she was still angry, if she would ever understand why he had hidden the truth. He would take out his phone, now a basic model, and look at her number, saved but never called. What right did he have? He'd messed up everything. One evening, Sophia, the coworker from the cafe, joined him on the rooftop with 2 cups of coffee. "The coffee here is good," she remarked, handing him a cup. "It is," he replied, taking a sip. "But I knew someone who made it better." Sophia smiled with understanding. "She must be special, for you to remember her so much." "She is," he sighed, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "But I made mistakes." "And you don't think you've paid enough for them yet?" Sophia asked, her voice gentle, seeing the weight he carried, the quiet determination in his eyes. Alejandro looked at his new life, the small hotel, the simple room he rented nearby. He felt like he was building something real, earning the respect of others through his actions, not his apellido. Don Jose was teaching him every aspect of the business from the ground up. "A good leader must know every job," Don Jose said, "from cleaning bathrooms to managing reservations." The irony wasn't lost on him, but this time it was his choice. He wrote in his notebook every night, documenting his learnings, his experiences. He dreamed of one day having his own small, cozy hotel, built on hard work and honesty. And in every one of those dreams, Isabella was there, somehow. Back in the city, Isabella stayed awake in her bed, Javier's words about Mateo swirling in her mind. The moon cast shadows that danced on the walls of her small room. On her nightstand, the local newspaper showed a small article. "Son of hotel magnate works as employee in Oaxaca." The photo was blurry, but there was no mistaking it. It was him, Alejandro. "Can't you sleep?" her mother asked from the doorway, seeing the light under her door. "I'm thinking," Isabella replied, sitting up in bed. Her mother sat beside her, picking up the newspaper. "You know," she said softly, her gaze distant, "sometimes pride only lets us see what we want to see, and makes us blind to the rest." She looked at Isabella, her eyes kind. "When your father left us, I chose to see it as a simple abandonment, because that was easier than seeing the complexities, the pressures, the parts one might have played. Our judgments. They say more about us sometimes than about the people we judge." Isabella looked at the blurry photo again, at the man who had given up everything. "Do you think I should look for him?" "I think you should do what your heart tells you," her mother replied gently. "But make sure it's your heart speaking, Isabella, not your wounded pride." The next morning, Isabella requested her accumulated vacation days from the cafe. Her co-workers exchanged knowing glances when she mentioned she was going to Oaxaca. She didn't have a clear plan, didn't even know what she would say when she saw him. She only knew she needed to see him, to hear him, to understand. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia, her co-worker, asked, helping her close the cafe one last time before her trip. "No," Isabella replied honestly, "but I'm sure I have to go." She found an old photo of them taken by a customer at the cafe, both laughing as they tried to create a design in the coffee foam. Her eyes stopped on Mateo's expression in the photo. He was looking at a girl making coffee. Maybe, she thought, it was time to find out who Alejandro Mateo really was, without surnames or fortunes getting in the way. Just him, the man she had met that day on the bus, the man who needed a ride, the man who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Part 12, The Encounter and the Future. The sun of Oaxaca shone intensely as Isabella stepped off the bus, her legs stiff from the long journey. Hotel Posada del Encuentro stood before her, small but welcoming. The lobby was cozy, filled with clay pots spilling over with flowers, and the soft sound of traditional music. An older man was at the reception desk. "I'm looking for Alejandro," she said, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. "Alejandro," Don Jose responded, studying her with curiosity. "He's just checking the air conditioning in room 12. He pointed up the stairs. "Second floor, to the right." Isabella climbed slowly, each step echoing in her mind like a drumbeat. She found room 12, the door open. Alejandro was facing away from her, leaning over an air conditioning unit, a toolbox beside him. His work shirt was damp with sweat, his face smudged with grime. "The coffee here is terrible," she said. Alejandro froze, then slowly turned around, wiping his hands on his work pants. His eyes, tired but clear, widened in disbelief when he saw her. "Isabella?" he whispered, as if she might be a hallucination. She walked forward, the small distance across the room feeling like miles, like years. "I've been thinking," she continued softly, her gaze taking in the calluses on his hands, the honest sweat on his brow. "If it's not the money that defines you, then what is?" Alejandro stood up straight, a slow, genuine smile forming on his lips, a smile she hadn't seen since the cafe days. But now it held a new depth, a new peace. "The decisions I make," he replied, his voice a little rough, "earned by physical work. And the work I put in." He gestured between himself and the room around them. "I couldn't choose my family name, Isabella. I couldn't choose my inheritance. But I can choose how I live. I can choose to build something myself." They looked at each other in a silence that felt eternal, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead, mixing the warm air with the scent of bougainvillea from the window. "Why did you come?" he asked finally, his voice quiet, vulnerable. "Because I needed to see for myself," she said, taking another step closer. "If the Alejandro I met in the cafe was real, if the man who gave up everything was who he truly wanted to be. And what do you see now?" Isabella took one more step, closing the distance, reaching out and taking his hands in hers, feeling the roughness of his working palms, the warmth of his skin. "I see someone who is finally being honest, Alejandro. Not just with me, but with himself." Alejandro's smile deepened, his eyes shining. He tentatively extended his hands, and Isabella took them, the simple contact charged with years of unsaid words, of pain, of hope. "I can't promise you it will be easy," he said, his voice low, acknowledging the reality of his new life. "I'm starting from zero, Isabella. Really from zero this time." "We already started," she smiled, her thumb gently tracing a calloused line on his palm. "The moment I decided to get on that bus to Oaxaca." He pulled her gently towards him, kissing her under the whirring fan, the kiss soft, hesitant at first, then deepening, filled with forgiveness, understanding, and the promise of a future they would build together, earned step by earned step. "The coffee here is good," he whispered against her lips, pulling back slightly. "It is," she agreed, her heart overflowing. "But I know someone who makes it better." "Are you offering to stay, Ms. Barista?" he asked, his voice hopeful. "I'm offering us a chance, Mr. Innkeeper," she replied, her eyes shining with love and determination. They sat in a small cafe nearby, the aroma of coffee and sweet bread filling the air. They talked for hours, sharing truths that had been hidden, healing wounds caused by pride and fear. There were no grand promises, just the simple reality of two people who had found their way back to each other. A year later, the old colonial building glowed under the Oaxaca sun, transformed. On the ground floor, a carved wooden sign announced Café del Encuentro, the Encounter Cafe, with the drawing of a coffee cup and a bus. Tribute to their beginning.
Upstairs was Posada del Encuentro, Dane.
Isabella, adjusting the espresso machine, smiled. The air inside, a mix of coffee and warm bread, felt like home. "Room 7 wants breakfast on their balcony," Alejandro said, entering from the service door connecting the cafe to the inn. His face was tanned, his hands rough, his smile genuine. "The elderly couple?" she asked, preparing the tray. "They loved your story about learning to fix air conditioners. I told them the short version," he laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. The inn, though small, had earned a reputation for its family atmosphere and personal service. Guests often came down not just for Isabella's delicious coffee, but for the stories they shared. Isabella's mother had even moved to Oaxaca, helping with administration while Isabella finished her thesis. A true family affair. Don Jose visited often, seeing the abandoned building he had once owned brought back to life. "Heard anything from your father?" Isabella asked, preparing a cappuccino with a leaf design in the foam. "Mother says he's still angry," Alejandro replied, his smile fading slightly. "But she's happy playing piano concerts in smaller theaters. Says the audience is more genuine." The jingle of the door announced the arrival of the first customers. A young couple entered, looking a little nervous. "I think I forgot my wallet," the boy mumbled, embarrassed. Isabella and Alejandro exchanged a knowing, tender look. "The coffee's on the house," Alejandro said, a direct echo of the kindness that had started it all. As the couple settled by the window, Isabella prepared 2 specialty coffees, the familiar rhythm comforting. "Who knows?" Alejandro whispered, leaning close, his voice filled with shared history and future promise. "Maybe they're just beginning their own encounter." In a corner, framed, hung an old napkin with the drawing of a coffee cup, a reminder that sometimes the best encounters, the most valuable connections, begin with a simple gesture of kindness on a crowded bus. And so, in this corner of Mexico, 2 people brought together by fate on a bus continued writing their story, 1 cup of coffee, 1 shared smile, 1 authentic moment at a time. And that's the story of Isabella and Alejandro, a journey from perceived wealth and hidden pain to genuine connection, sacrifice, and building a life and a love story, 1 encounter at a time. It's a reminder that true value isn't in inherited fortunes, but in earned dignity, honesty, and finding a partner who sees and loves the real you. If this story touched your heart, made you tear up, or simply reminded you of the power of kindness and authenticity, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment your favorite part below. Don't forget to subscribe to soul-stirring stories for more unforgettable tales of love, resilience, and finding belonging in unexpected places. Thank you for being part of our community. We'll see you in the next one for another story that touches the heart.